KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger, a public affairs program featuring stories from all over the Central Valley with Sevag Tateosian, 90.7 KFSR.
Welcome to the Central Valley Ledger. We're recording out of the beautiful downtown Fresno studios of the Community Media Access Collaborative, Fresno and Clovis, not too far from the newly opened Fulton Street. As you know, it used to be the Fulton Mall. Now it's the Fulton Street. Come out and take a look at all the cool things happening in downtown Fresno. We actually also want to welcome Paul Starcevich back on the crew. Paul was out for a few weeks, so welcome back, Paul. Today, I have a very big smile on my face as usual, but today I want to introduce you to our guest. I was a guest on her show back in 2004 or 2005. She used to host something called City in Action. She is our former city clerk of the City of Fresno, and you will see her everywhere, whether it's jogging, whether it's at community events, whether it's out in the community. Her name is the one and only Jackie Ryle. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It is so good to be here, Sevag.
So I can't forget, I will always remember the first time you and I met on the set was of your program, City in Action. Why don't you tell us about that program?
It was wonderful. I loved doing that. So that was part of my job as city clerk. And when I retired in 1995, Becky Klisch was my successor. She became city clerk. And she wanted to keep the show, but she didn't want to do the interviews. So she asked me if I would continue on a volunteer basis, and of course I said yes. And so for about another 8 or 10 years after I retired, I stayed on that show.
And a lot of people used to watch that show because I still remember when I got interviewed by you on that program. I went out in the community and someone said, hey, I saw you on Jackie Ryle's show. And I said, wow, you watched that show? They said yes. So you did that for a while. What a great opportunity to learn about what's going on in our community.
It was wonderful. It lasted, combined, lasted 22 years, and it only stopped because they changed their format and they didn't do it anymore at the station. But you're absolutely right. Kind of like you just get a chance to meet people, know what's going on all the time, and I've always loved knowing what was going on in the community, and especially downtown. You mentioned Fulton Street, which I love. So yeah, you're right. It was just a great opportunity.
Full circle. Now here I am interviewing
in the other chair
on the program,
yes.
Whereas before it was you interviewing me. How does that feel?
It feels great. Actually, I really, really like it. I love the way this has come full circle. It's been fun through the years. Actually, you were a pretty young kid. You're still a pretty young kid, but you were a pretty young kid then, and you've gone on and distinguished yourself in so many ways. Created an absolutely beautiful family. Been able to kind of watch you a little bit on Facebook and see you occasionally in person, so it's a major treat.
Thank you for the comments, and I watch you on Facebook, and I love your pictures. By the way, I never realized until Facebook how much of a gardener you are.
Well, Sevag, I'm not. I have to admit to you that the hollyhocks that appear once in a while, those are in my yard because hollyhocks are very hardy. I am not a gardener, but there is a rose garden about a mile on my jog route from my home that I try to get to every morning and stop and smell the roses. And the idea for putting those roses on Facebook is, folks, take the time to stop and smell the roses.
And enjoy the little things in life.
Exactly, exactly.
So before we get too much into what you're doing these days and your career, everybody in Fresno, I think, knows you. They've seen you around everywhere. Tell us, are you from Fresno originally?
I'm not. I didn't get far. I'm from Modesto originally.
Oh, you're from Modesto.
I'm from Modesto. Born, raised, went to school there, was only out of the valley for about 6 months when my father returned from World War II. And we went to Texas where he finished his tour. And back to Modesto. And then I came to Fresno in 1963 and entered into my career. And it's, I've sunk taproots here. This is home.
City clerk.
Yeah.
You were at the city clerk's office for, tell our audience.
2 years.
Congratulations.
Thank
What
you.
a wonderful career you had over there.
It was wonderful. I watched the evolution of a form of government from one form of government to another form of government. I saw in the very beginning in 1963, elected council members typically had careers. They were elected to represent their community, and it was all general. There was no district, and they didn't have offices. They didn't have assistants. They came to City Hall only when it was time for a council meeting, and then watched sort of the evolution of when that it became, full-time work as the city grew, as the needs, and as citizens became involved. When I first started, there wasn't much citizen involvement.
The city was different, I think, back then. You be the judge of that, but it seems like we grew big time
We grew a
between
lot.
60s and now. Talk about that.
We really have grown a lot. It's interesting. I will tell you, you mentioned Fulton Street. I was here when they broke ground to create the mall.
Wow.
I was here when they broke ground. I've got rocks on my stairs because they gave us pieces away. I was here when they broke ground to put the street back in. We've grown hugely geographically. I mean, it's a very large city, 5th largest in the state now. And of course, when you have that, you have an increase in everything. One of the things is activities. I like to say that my complaint about Fresno is there's too much going on and not enough time, and I don't get to all of it. You remember the day when people would say, gee, there's just nothing to do. Well,
Nothing
that's
to do in Fresno is what they say.
no longer the case. There is so much going on in so many ways. If nothing else, if you follow what's going on at the university, there's every kind of lecture and speaker and group and club, but then go to things like Art Hop and the galleries that we have now. We have so much available to us.
So back when you were the city clerk, I hear stories. I have a lot of friends that are older than me, and I love that because there's, you all have experienced this city in a way that I'll never be able to experience. So was it true that you would look out and you all saw like Fashion Fair being built or Manchester being built?
Oh, yes. Manchester was here. When I came in 63, Manchester was here. Fashion Fair was not, and that was quite a controversial issue when that came before the city council, and there was controversy associated with that was the beginning of the demise of the mall, because you put in a large shopping center, and that's easier to get to, and you take your car and the rest of that. And the mall, bless its heart, was a wonderful place, and it was also European design. Europeans come and wander and sit outside and drink coffee, and here in the United States of America, we like to drive our cars.
Yeah.
So yes, I saw all of that over time. I did.
Explain to us, so we had a lot of people living in the downtown and Tower District area and not much up north. Do you remember how the lay was? Because, and I'm asking you the question because like here we drive by River Park and we see all those houses there. And it's hard to imagine that 20, 30 years ago, they weren't there.
They weren't there. I mean, you had fig orchards and you had grape vineyards and there really was not much out there. I remember, it's interesting, when Woodward Park became a city park, and I was here for that, and they created, they had to figure out how to do their annexation process because they couldn't just do a corridor out there. And they sort of did that a little bit because none of that was city. When I first started in 63, every single week on city council agendas, there were annexations. That was huge then. They were annexing land like crazy.
By annexing, you mean it's county property and the city
becomes city.
For city purposes?
For city governance and for city services. And so the two areas that have remained county islands is Old Fig Garden and what do they call the area over around First? I can't remember the name of that island now. There's a county island over there.
What area? First and
It's east of Blackstone and around First in there.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with that area.
Yeah,
I don't know what it's called.
It's behind Manchester.
Yeah.
Back up in there. Belmont? I can't remember what it's called. How terrible. Sometimes that happens.
So, as you're seeing the city grow, was there any part of you that said, you know what, I want to move to another place? Maybe not so much with the city growing, but because you as a city clerk, you not only were in the office over 30 years, but you were the city clerk for 28 years. You were in demand for other valley cities. Did you ever think, you know what, maybe I should go?
Never. I love Fresno. I was with a group yesterday. They were talking about, somebody said, well, I don't care. I love Fresno. And I was facilitating. And, the facilitator typically doesn't get into the content, but I had to say, you know what, I will say it. You hear people say it. I love Fresno. And I loved it from the beginning. I loved going to work for the city. I was in the clerk's office before I became clerk. And I knew the first time I walked into a city hall that I was a public servant. I was proud of that term. I wanted to serve. And this was an interesting place to serve.
And you saw all the agendas
I did.
as city clerk. So you were like front row on what's going to happen and stuff like that. How exciting.
I used that term.
No way.
I was a front row observer. And here's what I saw, Sevag. The printed agendas and the not printed agendas.
Yeah.
There were other agendas. There always were. I mean, there always will be,
Talk about city. So right now, as I say City Hall, people are going to remember or talk about the spaceship-looking glass building not too far from where we're recording the show. But there were previous city halls that looked different. Tell us about that.
There were. The city hall where I spent most of my career is the city hall on the corner of Fresno and M Street, which is now considered the city hall annex and contains the police department and some other offices. And that was where I went to work. And I had the opportunity to work in the new city hall for about 2 years. I actually loved that old city hall. And here's the interesting thing about it. That was constructed in 1941, and it was way ahead of its time. It caused as much flap in 41 with its design as our spaceship created. Isn't that interesting? Now I don't remember it. I mean, I'm really not quite that old, but I've read about that. I read about what's happened in the old city halls. And then there were a couple of others down here that I have pictures of. But boy, I spent a lot of years in that old city hall.
And then at some point, not too far from there, there was an old courthouse that looked very unique.
Oh.
Were you around during that time?
Such a sore subject. Sevag. I watched from my office in Old City Hall faced out onto the parking lot, and right across the parking lot was that beautiful courthouse.
Tell us about what the courthouse really looked like for people who now know it.
It was an old-fashioned square building with a cupola on top. It had statuary on it. It was just beautiful. And they made a decision to knock it down because they said it wouldn't withstand an earthquake, which we still haven't had. And I have to tell you, they had this great big wrecking ball, and they hit it over and over and over. I think it took almost 3 weeks for it to get knocked down, and we watched every hit.
So how unique and what an interesting time for you to be city clerk to watch that happen. I mean, what was was the consensus that, hey, take it down at the time?
Oh, from the community? Absolutely not. I can tell you that 3 members of the Board of Supervisors who were up for election lost their political careers. They lost their political careers. That was a very unpopular vote. Talking about full circle, last year, the Caglia family, they're wonderful, they preserve everything. They had made sure that cupola was preserved, and it was stored out at Chris Sorensen's art studio, out where that is, the end of Van Ness. They moved it on a big trailer from that place under the city sign down to the fairgrounds where it sits now with that wonderful museum there. So and I followed it. I got in my car and followed it.
So now it's at the fairgrounds.
Yeah, it is.
Well, the fairgrounds has several unique things out there.
Wonderful museum, and a lot of that has been supplied by the Caglia family, who just saved everything. They're the ones that were responsible for the Warner's Theater not becoming a parking lot. And so a lot of the stuff from that collection that was preserved is now out of the fairground. They have a wonderful museum there. Wonderful.
And then when the mall came in, you saw the mall.
I did.
You saw it become a mall.
I did.
Talk about how busy. I have friends that say that they would go to the God Shocks, they would go to the mall for shopping and stuff. So there was a time when the Fulton Mall was buzzing with activity.
I think it really thrived for, I don't have stats on this, but 2 or 3 years, I think it did. And then it started to demise a little bit because people weren't going down there, they didn't have their cars. But I'll tell you what, the first city council meeting I ever attended, and they met at night then, and they had this it was December 3rd, 1963. They had this big model, And I had worked for the city clerk's office in Modesto, and those were at night, formal meetings. This was daytime, formal meetings at night, and you didn't get up, you didn't say a word. Well, in Fresno, it was much less formal. They had this big model. Everybody jumped up, ran down and looked at it. I was like, what is this place? And so that was in December 63. In 64 is when they broke ground and built that mall. And yes, I can tell you that we used to, see, even before that, we would go downtown on our lunch hour and have lunch at J.J. Newberry or Woolworth. I mean, all those stores were there. I remember shopping at Gottschalk's. I remember shopping at, what was the other department store? I can't remember what it was. Boy, I'm forgetting a lot of things tonight. But there were local stores. There were menswear stores. There were the Weil, Mr. Weil had his women's clothing store down there, and we frequented it and we shopped, and it was just crushing to see things start to leave. And you mentioned Gottschalk's. Gottschalk's was the last holdout of the major retailers downtown. They stayed past everyone else.
And I'm not an expert in retail, but I could imagine that they had several opportunities to relocate. Do you think that they were a holdout because they wanted to see the downtown area continue to grow?
I do, because they actually had other stores.
Yeah.
And they built other stores north. They built north. They were retailers, but they stayed downtown as long as they could. I gave them such credit. I appreciated that so much.
I saw you at the opening of the Fulton Street.
Yeah.
Months ago.
Yeah.
So now it's a street again.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll ever get to back when the Fulton area was that popular?
I think we will. I think it will be different. It won't be the same as it was before. It'll be a different venue, but the art is so beautiful, and they're just starting to, I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. They're just starting. People are interested. A couple of those businesses have upgraded themselves. There's lots of places to eat. There are lots of people working downtown.
Yeah.
Now there are all those lofts that people are living in. And so I believe that now that there's a market, there's an emerging market, that it will have its rebirth.
So going back to your time as city clerk, what other, I mean, I know that we can spend hours talking about this, but I want to give people the perspective of your eyes have seen so many things in downtown because you worked here for so long. Anything other major things that happened while you were city clerk in downtown?
Yeah, it was interesting. We have a big building that I think they called it the Golden State Building now. I think the county has offices there. That's the Del Webb Building. I don't care what anybody else calls it.
And you're talking about the big, tall building.
Used to be a hotel.
Used to be.
Facing right out was the Del Webb Hotel, facing onto Tulare Street, between M and N, I think, or no, M and L.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. And boy, when you get up on top of that, you could see all over the city, beautiful views. So that was a hotel.
So
I saw that.
You saw it as a hotel, actually.
I saw it built.
Oh, wow. So tell us about
it built. It was a big deal.
Was it nice in there as a hotel? Because I
very
worked in there
nice.
for a while, and I kept trying to picture it as a hotel, and I can't picture it as a hotel.
It was nice. It really was. Well, if you think about that big rotunda where you go downstairs and you got the big ballroom.
Right.
That's that, and there are still nice parties down there and events down there. It was a hotel, and it was as nice as we had because we really didn't have much by way of a lot of hotels here.
And unique because it was so tall.
And see, that's interesting because we really had height limitations. I'm still not quite sure why that is. We had height limitations. So what we did was we encouraged all the sprawl, all the sprawl here, which now they're trying to contain, and now the value is for infill, so that we don't sprawl further because of services and so forth. But they had real height limitations, so that one exceeded the height limitations. And then subsequent to that, we've got this wonderful new federal courthouse.
Yeah.
The new courthouse after they tore down the old one, which I really don't like. It looks like a toaster. Now, and then there are, of course, the wonderful historic buildings that we have. There's no more beautiful building anywhere than the Hall of Records. That's a beautiful building. And then the buildings down on Fulton Street, the Bank of Italy.
And you know what? Bank of Italy, did you see that ever operational?
I was trying to think that the other day. I'm not sure when that actually closed. Probably because I went to Penny's,
Yeah.
which is right across the street.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say probably.
And Hotel Fresno. Any thoughts on Hotel Fresno? I mean, because now it sits empty, not too far from where I work, and I look at it and think, I wish I was around when this was in its heyday.
I've read about it. I love Kathy Rehart and all her legends and legacies, and I've read about Hotel Fresno. It's nothing but a shell now. The preservationists feel pretty strongly, and I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but it doesn't, it's just a plain square shell. If they're going to do something, I wish they would, in one way or the other. I know it had glory days. Now, that was before my time, but it had glory days. The other place that had glory days, this isn't downtown, I'm going to leave town for just a minute, was the Hacienda out on 99 Freeway.
I completely, and I live out that way.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the Hacienda on 99
And Clinton.
So tell us about the Hacienda.
So that was the place to go. And they had wonderful events out there. And then when you went downstairs, they had a bar. You'd go into the bar. And then behind the bar, there was this big tank. And they had swimmers, women swimming, dressed like mermaids, swimming around in there.
So like the movies we see, swimmers, and you're at a bar, and you look, and there's water right next to you. That was actually at the Hacienda?
Absolutely was. And they boasted folks like Frank Sinatra. I mean, that was a great place. And then it started to deteriorate a little bit, and then they sort of upgraded it back to be a motel. And then, of course, that now has become the mental health systems.
Mental health systems.
Yes, for women and children, yeah.
Talk about, you've seen some incredible things.
I have.
You can't pick a favorite, obviously, because it's so hard to do with so many, but something that stands out with you to this day, what is that?
Well, honestly, that would have to be Fulton Street. That's so major, and having seen it as a street, and then having seen all the construction and how, in its glory days as a mall, it was wonderful. It really was wonderful. And then to see it deteriorate, so that's why I'm really hopeful and happy about the fact that it now has the opportunity for new life. And there are a lot of people that love it. There are a lot of efforts underway. So that would probably be the one. And of course, watching them knock down the courthouse and then build this new city hall, those were major pieces. I will tell you, I'm a downtown girl. I love downtown.
And we're talking a little bit off air, and after the interview, you're going to run over down the street.
To my new favorite place in downtown, to Bitwise South Stadium.
How creative is that organization?
Amazing. Sevag is the wave of the future. It really is. It's already changed the face of Fresno. It's changing the face of the valley. What they say, and they're right, why should you have to go to San Jose for the Silicon Valley? We can have it right here, and they are creating it.
And they're correct, because they're growing and they keep getting interest. So very impressive what they're doing over there.
They have great statistics. Their GeekWise Academy, where they teach programming, they have great statistics. I think over 3,000 folks have already graduated from that. And there's a very high percentage, 85, 90%, who have gotten really decent jobs at good starting pay here in the Valley in technology.
So we're running out of time this week. We're going to do 2 shows with you because you have so much knowledge. This is part 1 of a 2-part series with the one and only Dr. Jackie Ryle. I wanted to ask you about your time as city clerk. When did you decide to retire, and why did you make that decision? Because you've retired from there, but I think you're busier than someone working full-time because you're everywhere.
I sometimes wonder how I had time to work. You know what? I had thought that I would retire at 55. I had that in my mind. And I had an opportunity to go from the city to the Better Business Bureau. Doug Broughton was running it then, and they had what they called a dispute settlement center, which was an opportunity to go full-time into dispute resolution with using mediation. And it just happened that during that period of time, there was some there were some difficult times in City Hall. There were some very vocal council members that were really in a lot of conflict. And I knew that I had made the right decision, that it was a good time to retire. And it's interesting, on my 55th birthday, I'm sitting in a council meeting. Doug was across the street, Doug Broughton, at the Board of Supervisors. At that meeting, they approved the money to fund the position he had talked to me about. So I'm sitting up there in the dais, I see him come in the back, and he gives me the thumbs up, and I said, that's it. I'm giving my notice today.
That had to be a tough decision for you because you loved being the city clerk.
It was.
But that opened a new door for you.
It really did.
So now, how can people get in touch with you, and What is it that you're doing now?
Do you know what? I actually have a website. I'll tell you what. I have www.jackieryle.com, and it sort of reflects some of the things I do, and it has contact information. Get a hold of me by email. I'm still a facilitator. I carry my easels and my flip charts and my pens around all the time, and I'm able to work with groups and do things like mission statements and board retreats and staff development, all those kinds of things, and I love it. I get a chance to be in rooms with people who really care about community. That's where all my time is.
So what is a facilitator?
A facilitator really is somebody who gets with a group of any size and elicits from them what they care about and what their mutual interests are, what their mutual goals are, and ways to get to those, whether it's to resolve conflict, whether it's to develop a program, whether it's to renew a program. But the facilitator is there on behalf of the group and doesn't get into the content.
So you're not there jumping, you're not taking sides on conflicts. You're there trying to get people to work together.
Yes, that's the whole thing. And that's why it's good as a mediator, as a facilitator, same thing. You're objective, you're neutral, which is what my requirement was as city clerk. You're objective, you're neutral, and you're there for their process. They're there for their content. So you help keep them on track, for one thing. You know, it's easy to get off track. You can move it back to, this is what we're doing here today. That's important. We'll keep that track of that, but let's get back on what we're doing here today.
And you do that for nonprofits and board of directors?
I do. Mostly the nonprofit community benefit community.
We'll come back to the second show and talk a little bit more about that and some of the other things you're involved in now. Jackie, thank you so much for being a part of the program this week.
Thank you, Sevag. This was a true pleasure. Thank you.
Full circle. You interviewed me back in 2004 and 2005. Now the roles are reversed.
That's it.
That's all for this edition of the Central Valley Ledger. Our guest this week was Dr. Jackie Ryle. She's the former city clerk of the City of Fresno, currently a facilitator, and does a bunch of other stuff. Thank you to our volunteer crew that made this show and every show possible. We couldn't do this program without you. Thank you to our audience members listening to this broadcast on KFSR 90.7 FM and to those watching the broadcast on CMAC, Comcast 93 and AT&T 99. We hope you enjoyed the program this week and learned a little bit about the history of this great city that we live in. Tune in next week to a new edition.
KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger every Sunday morning at 11:30. For a complete program schedule, visit kfsr.org.